Hey, well, tonight I'm angry about the second impeachment trial, and you may have noticed that on Saturday the Senate voted to acquit Donald Trump on charges of incitement to insurrection. Now, many people have pointed out, specifically Jonathan Turley, a respected law professor, he pointed out that it seems as if the Democrats set up this impeachment to fail, and it certainly does seem as if they set it up to fail. The first problem is they made the charge, incitement to insurrection, a very difficult charge to make stick. There's no way that Donald Trump was inciting an insurrection. He may have been encouraging his supporters to protest. He may have been encouraging his protesters to riot. But even if he was, and I don't think the language that he used shows that he was encouraging them to riot, even if he did encourage them to riot, that is not incitement to insurrection. The other thing I'd like to point out is everybody talks about an armed insurrection. I believe one person had a baseball bat. I don't consider that armed. I haven't seen any evidence that any protesters were armed at all, unless you count a single baseball bat as armed, and I do not. The other thing that's disgraceful was Mitch McConnell's speech, and I certainly hope that Mitch finds his political career abruptly ended, because Mitch McConnell symbolizes the problem. He is a Republican. He is the leader of the Senate Republicans. And Mitch McConnell, for the last 4 years, has not been a supporter of the Republican president. Mitch McConnell goes his own way, or rather, Mitch McConnell goes the establishment way. Mitch McConnell looks out for the Senate. Mitch McConnell looks out for the establishment. No one is representing Trump. Now, this is probably going to be the last post that we make about the Donald Trump presidency, but there are some things that I would like to point out before we go. The first is, I don't believe Donald Trump incited a riot at all. I believe Donald Trump sincerely believed that votes were stolen from him, and he wanted the votes to be accurately counted. He encouraged people to speak up, to express their dissatisfaction with the fact that the vote count was wrong, and this has now been misinterpreted as an incitement to riot, and even worse than an incitement to riot, an incitement to insurrection. It never was. A few tens, maybe even hundreds of people entered the Capitol. I've seen people within the Capitol taking care to stay within the velvet guide ropes. That is not an armed insurrection. I don't know anybody who could possibly argue that people obeying the laws to stay within the guide areas are actually involved in an armed insurrection. I don't believe that they were. I think the hatred for Donald Trump is so visceral at this point that Democrats are seemingly unable to talk or think about anything else. Now that they have impeached Donald Trump twice, they are still focused on Donald Trump. They don't seem to have any issues that don't involve being against Donald Trump. This entire impeachment issue just shows the dysfunction that exists within our government. This was theater. If you watched the hearings on the impeachment in the Senate, you will notice that, number one, the House never called a single witness during their investigation before they took it to the Senate. And the histrionics and emotional heartstring tugging that went on, the description of policemen who were killed by rioters, it turns out that a policeman who they said had been bludgeoned with a fire extinguisher and had died, had not been hit with a fire extinguisher, had not been hit with anything at all. We can't trust any of the news reports of this protest, which I believe was a protest and not an armed insurrection. The fact that politicians are still so focused on Trump, even though he is no longer the president, he is no longer in politics at all, as a matter of fact, we seem unable to move on. Everything seems to revolve around Donald Trump and the hatred for Donald Trump. The Democrats chose a very high bar. Incitement to insurrection was never going to be possible to be proven, and that makes many people doubt whether the Democrats were involved in this exercise to impeach Donald Trump, or if there was just a big TV show with lots of sound and fury signifying nothing. It certainly appears to be the case, and if you've listened to McConnell's speech on the floor of the Senate after the impeachment vote, you'll realize that McConnell's speech doesn't even rise to the level of sound and fury signifying nothing, because there was no fury. There was just sound, an endless droning excuse, an endless droning blaming of Donald Trump, an endless covering up of the fact that no one really investigated the claims that Donald Trump made about election fraud. Many courts around the land, including the Supreme Court, refused to hear the actual issues of the case, and people now claim that those cases were not legally valid, despite the fact that no legal authority has ever reviewed them. This impeachment just illustrates the complete and total dysfunction and breakdown of the US government. The Republican Party does not deserve to survive this experience. There were only a few Republican senators who voted to convict Donald Trump, and the majority voted to acquit him. But the fact that the Republican senators and Republican House members are not demanding that these emotional, inaccurate words, that these words are no longer used, the fact that this protest has been redefined as a violent insurrection, an armed insurrection no less, even though apparently only one person in the crowd had a baseball bat. This just shows how the media changes our perspective on these things. There was no armed insurrection. There was an angry protest at the results. There was an angry protest because people believed that the results had not been accurately counted. Whether you think that they are correct or not, the day will come when you yourself will believe that your votes were not accurately counted. And who will stand up for you then? The fact that Mitch McConnell, the fact that the rest of the Republicans give backhanded support to Trump by voting to acquit him, and at the same time give speeches where they blame him for the violence that took place at the Capitol. People were outraged at the fact that they felt that their votes were not being counted. Half of the country is going to feel that their votes were not counted, whether they're Democrats or Republicans at this point. And the fact that the leaders, the senators, McConnell specifically, the Republican, the fact that he's not drawing the party together means that there's not going to be a Republican Party at all. It's going to be a Trump party. It's going to be a constitutional party. I certainly hope we've seen the last of McConnell. I certainly hope we've seen the last of most of these senators and House members, whether they are Republican or Democrat. The level of histrionics and emotion is more fit for a groundhog's improv stage than for the US Senate. And quite frankly, I found the entire impeachment hearing, while wildly entertaining, completely inappropriate, and a sad commentary on the state of our government today. Please, let's wake up.